Your empire's secrets are for sale, Mr. Sterling, and I'm not the one selling them. In Manhattan's gleaming Sterling Tower, David Sterling, a 30-year-old CEO, teeters on the brink of collapse. Haunted by his father's legacy, he faces a billion-dollar AI deal with a Chinese tech giant, his last chance to fend off a hostile takeover. But when his interpreter cancels, David's words falter in a glitchy app, his panic palpable before a stone-faced delegation. Then a janitor in a Navy uniform steps forward, her voice slicing through the chaos in flawless Mandarin. Who is this woman? What power does she hold in her quiet gaze? The truth will unravel empires. The 80th floor of Sterling Tower sliced into Manhattan's skyline like a shard of ice, its glass walls reflecting a city that pulsed with ambition and betrayal. Inside the conference room, David Sterling stood alone, his tailored Navy suit a thin armor against the weight of his father's legacy. At 30, he was a young king in a crumbling empire, his sharp jaw clenched as he paced before a portrait of Arthur Sterling, the visionary who built Sterling Innovations. The old man's painted eyes bore into him, accusing, unyielding. Today, a billion-dollar AI contract with a Chinese tech giant was David's last chance to fend off a hostile takeover. Failure meant annihilation. His phone buzzed, a venomous sting in the sterile air. David glanced at the screen, and his heart lurched. Food poisoning. In the hospital. Can't make it. The message from his star interpreter, Li Wei, was a death knell. 10 minutes remained until the delegation arrived, and David's Mandarin was non-existent. He fumbled with a translation app, its robotic voice mocking his desperation as he rehearsed a greeting. Welcome to Sterling. The words sounded hollow, a child's plea in a coliseum of wolves. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his fingers twitching as he adjusted his tie. He could hear his father's voice, a ghost from the past. A leader never falters. But David was faltering, and the clock was merciless. The conference room's glass doors slid open, and Mr. Chen entered, flanked by 4 executives in immaculate black suits. Their faces were stone, their eyes obsidian blades that cut through David's facade. He stepped forward, app in hand, and stammered, Ni hao. The app glitched, spitting out garbled nonsense. You, good, machine, happy. Mr. Chen's expression didn't shift, but his silence was a guillotine. David's throat tightened, his pulse hammering in his ears. He saw the takeover looming, stock prices plummeting, his name erased from the empire his father built. The room felt like a cage, its glass walls closing in, trapping him in his own incompetence. Rebecca Vance, the COO, stood at the table's edge, her red dress a slash of blood against the room's sterile whites. Her smile was a razor, promising control but hiding something darker. David, we'll manage, she said, her voice smooth as venom, but her eyes flickered with something, ambition perhaps, or glee at his unraveling. David didn't trust her, not fully, but she was his anchor in this storm. He nodded, clutching his phone like a lifeline, and tried again. We value partnership. The app mangled the words into absurdity, and one of the executives raised an eyebrow, a gesture sharper than any insult. Mr. Chen folded his hands, his silence louder than a scream. David's mind raced, grasping for a solution, but all he found was panic. In the corner, unnoticed, Jasmine Parker pushed a cleaning cart, her Navy uniform blending into the shadows. At 28, she was a ghost in Sterling Tower, her presence ignored by the executives who ruled this glass kingdom. Her hair was pulled into a low bun, her movements precise as she wiped a smudge from the floor. But her eyes, sharp, unyielding, missed nothing. She'd heard every whispered deal, every careless boast, every lie that echoed through these halls. For 3 years, she'd cleaned their messes, but today she listened closer. David's faltering voice, Rebecca's calculated calm, the ticking clock. It was a symphony of chaos, and Jasmine was its silent conductor. David's hands shook as he tried another phrase, the app now stuck on a looping error. This is a disaster, he muttered, barely audible. Rebecca leaned closer, her whisper a blade. Pull yourself together, David. They're watching. But he couldn't. the weight of his father's portrait pressed down, its eyes screaming failure. He imagined the headlines: Sterling heir crumbles in billion-dollar blunder. His legacy, his name, his empire, gone. Mr. Chen leaned forward, his voice low, speaking in rapid Mandarin. David stared, helpless, as the words washed over him like a foreign tide. He was drowning, and no one could save him. Or so he thought. From the corner, a voice emerged, low, clear, and impossibly steady, cutting through the room like a blade through fog. Mr. Chen, please forgive our unpreparedness, it said in flawless Mandarin. A company's honor is often tested in its most unexpected moments. Every head turned. Jasmine Parker stood, rag in hand, her posture unbowed. Her words flowed like water, precise and commanding, as if she'd been born to this stage. Mr. Chen's eyes narrowed, not with disdain, but with curiosity, a predator reassessing its prey. David's jaw dropped, his panic suspended in disbelief. Rebecca's smile froze, a crack in her perfect mask. Who are you? David stammered, his voice barely a whisper. Jasmine met his gaze, her eyes holding a depth he couldn't fathom. Just the janitor, she said softly in English, but her tone carried a weight that made the room feel smaller. Mr. Chen responded in Mandarin, a test, a proverb about trust forged in fire. Jasmine answered without hesitation, her voice weaving respect and authority into every syllable. The executives exchanged glances, their stone faces softening. David's mind reeled. This wasn't possible. A janitor. Here. Now. Rebecca stepped forward, her voice sharp. This is absurd. She's not qualified. But David ignored her, his desperation clinging to Jasmine like a lifeline. Keep going, he said, his voice hoarse. Jasmine nodded, stepping into the light, her cleaning cart abandoned. As she translated Mr. Chen's next words, her fluency was a revelation, a lifeline in a sinking ship. But beneath her calm, something stirred, a purpose, a plan, a secret buried in the dust she'd swept for years. David didn't know it yet, but the woman he'd overlooked was about to rewrite his empire's fate, and someone in this room was already plotting to destroy her. The conference room on the 80th floor of Sterling Tower was a crucible of silence, the air thick with the aftermath of Jasmine Parker's voice cutting through David Sterling's panic. Her flawless Mandarin still echoed, a phantom that shifted the room's gravity. David, his navy suit now creased from nervous pacing, stared at the janitor who had just saved his billion-dollar deal, or at least delayed its collapse. Jasmine stood calmly, her navy uniform a stark contrast to the polished executives, her rag dangling like a forgotten prop. Mr. Chen, the Chinese delegation's leader, tilted his head, his obsidian eyes narrowing, not in disdain but in curiosity. He spoke, his Mandarin rapid, a proverb about trust forged in unexpected fires. Jasmine responded without hesitation, her voice smooth as polished stone, weaving respect and authority into each syllable. Trust, Mr. Chen, is indeed a flame that reveals truth in its heat. Her counter-proverb drew a faint nod from him, a crack in his stoic facade. David's heart pounded, relief warring with disbelief. Who was this woman? His mind replayed her words from moments ago. A company's honor is tested in its most unexpected moments, and the weight of his father's portrait on the wall grew heavier. Arthur Sterling's painted gaze seemed to mock him, whispering that he, David, was a pretender to the throne. Rebecca Vance, the COO, stood rigid at the table's edge, her red dress a warning flare. Her smile, sharp as a blade, had frozen into something brittle. She leaned toward David, her whisper venomous. A janitor, David. This is a billion-dollar deal, not a stage for charity cases. Her words were a scalpel, slicing into his already fraying confidence. But David had no choice. His app was useless, his Mandarin non-existent, and the takeover loomed like a guillotine. Keep going, he muttered to Jasmine, his voice hoarse, his eyes flicking between her and Mr. Chen. Jasmine nodded, stepping fully into the light, her cleaning cart abandoned in the shadows. As she translated, Jasmine's words were more than a bridge between languages. They were a lifeline. She captured the nuances of Mr. Chen's questions about AI scalability, her tone steady, her pauses deliberate. When David spoke, fumbling through technical jargon, she wove in a subtle addition. As our founder often said, a skyscraper crumbles without its foundation. The phrase, Arthur Sterling's mantra, hit David like a cold wind. His father's words, buried in old memos he'd tried to forget, were now alive in the mouth of a janitor. His hands clenched, a flicker of paranoia igniting. How did she know? Was this a coincidence or something more? Mr. Chen's eyes softened, impressed by Jasmine's fluency and the cultural resonance of her words. He posed a question about long-term partnerships, his tone testing, probing for weakness. Jasmine translated with surgical precision, her gaze steady, unflinching. David watched her, his mind a storm of questions. She was too composed, too perfect for someone who swept floors. Rebecca's earlier warning echoed. She could be a plant. Yet as Jasmine spoke, the room's tension eased, the delegation's stern faces warming. Even Rebecca's icy stare faltered, replaced by a flicker of unease. She gripped her pen, its tip digging into her notepad, betraying her calm. The meeting paused for a break, and the delegation stepped out to confer. David slumped into a chair, his tie loosened, sweat glistening on his brow. "Who are you?" he asked Jasmine, his voice low, edged with suspicion. She met his gaze, her eyes a deep well of secrets. "Just the janitor, Mr. Sterling," she said, her tone soft but carrying a weight that made the glass walls feel closer. Rebecca interjected, her voice sharp as a whip. "This is absurd. She's not qualified to represent us." Her words were a challenge, but Jasmine didn't flinch, her posture unyielding, her rag still clutched like a talisman. In the hallway, Rebecca pulled David aside, her voice a hissed warning. "You're gambling everything on a nobody. What if she's working for our rivals? This is too convenient." Her eyes gleamed with something darker. Ambition, perhaps, or fear of losing control. David's paranoia deepened, but he couldn't deny Jasmine's skill. "We need her," he snapped, brushing past her. Yet her words lingered, a poison seeping into his thoughts. He ordered HR to pull Jasmine's file, his fingers trembling as he typed the email. Unseen, Jasmine returned to her cart, her movements deliberate, her eyes scanning the room. She'd heard Rebecca's whisper, felt the weight of David's suspicion. For 3 years, she'd been invisible, cleaning the messes of those who ruled this tower. But invisibility was her weapon. She'd listened to their secrets, their betrayals, their lies. As she wiped a smudge from the glass, her mind cataloged every word spoken today. David's panic, Rebecca's venom, Mr. Chen's probing questions. She knew this meeting was more than a deal. It was a chessboard, and she was no pawn. As the delegation returned, David straightened, his heart racing. Jasmine resumed her place, her voice steady as she translated Mr. Chen's next question. But beneath her calm, a fire burned, a purpose forged in years of silence. Rebecca watched her, her smile gone, replaced by a predator's glare. David felt the room shift, the balance of power tilting toward a woman he'd never noticed before. And somewhere in the dust she'd swept, a secret waited to unravel them all. The conference room on Sterling Tower's 80th floor exhaled its tension as the Chinese delegation stepped out for a break, leaving behind a silence that felt like the pause before a storm. Jasmine Parker's flawless Mandarin still hung in the air, a defiant echo that had shifted the room's power. David Sterling slumped into a leather chair, his navy suit crumpled, his tie a noose loosened by trembling fingers. The portrait of his father, Arthur Sterling, loomed above, its painted eyes boring into him, accusing him of weakness. Jasmine's words, "A skyscraper crumbles without its foundation," replayed in his mind, a taunt from a past he'd tried to bury. Who was she, this janitor who wielded his father's words like a blade? Rebecca Vance, the COO, stood by the glass wall, her red dress a stark wound against the sterile room. Her smile was gone, replaced by a predator's glare, her fingers gripping her pen so tightly the plastic creaked. Jasmine's performance had cracked her polished facade, and she hated cracks. "A janitor, David," she hissed, stepping closer, her voice low and venomous. "You're gambling a $1 billion deal on a nobody. Don't you find this convenient? She could be a plant from our rivals." Her words slithered into David's already fraying psyche, each syllable a seed of doubt. He wanted to dismiss her, but the paranoia she sowed took root. Jasmine was too perfect, too poised for someone who swept floors. David's eyes flicked to Jasmine, who had returned to her cleaning cart, her movements deliberate, almost ritualistic. Her navy uniform blended into the shadows, but her presence was a spotlight he couldn't ignore. She wiped the glass table, her low bun neat despite the chaos she'd unleashed. "We need her," he snapped at Rebecca, his voice sharper than intended. But her warning lingered, a poison seeping into his thoughts. He pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling as he typed a curt email to HR. "Send me Jasmine Parker's file. Now." The clean, empty file he'd seen earlier gnawed at him. Too sterile, too devoid of history. Nobody was that invisible, not unless they meant to be. In a server room 2 floors below, Leo Martinez hunched over his laptop, his fingers dancing across the keys as he debugged a network glitch. The young cybersecurity engineer's casual polo shirt was damp with sweat, not from the work, but from what he'd just overheard. Rebecca's voice, sharp and cold, had carried through the hallway as she spoke into her phone. "Dig into her past. Family, records, anything we can use. I want to leverage by tomorrow." Leo's stomach churned. He'd long despised Rebecca's ruthless ambition, her win-at-all-costs ethos, a betrayal of the values Arthur Sterling had etched into the company's foundation. Jasmine's intervention in the meeting had been a shock, but Rebecca's reaction was a warning. Leo decided to watch her, his fingers hovering over his keyboard, itching to dig into her digital shadow. Back in the conference room, the delegation returned, Mr. Chen leading with his measured stride, his obsidian eyes scanning the room. David straightened, forcing a smile that felt like a grimace. Jasmine resumed her translations, her voice a steady current guiding the conversation. Mr. Chen asked about AI integration timelines, his tone probing, testing for cracks. Jasmine's responses were flawless, weaving cultural nuances that made the executives nod in approval. But David's mind was elsewhere, trapped in a spiral of doubt. Rebecca's words echoed, "A plant from our rivals." Jasmine's fluency, her cryptic reference to Arthur's mantra, it was too precise, too deliberate. Was she playing him? The thought tightened his chest, his pulse a drumbeat of paranoia. Rebecca watched Jasmine like a hawk, her eyes narrowing with each translated phrase. She leaned toward David again, her whisper a serpent's hiss. "You're letting her control this. If she's a spy, this deal is already dead." David's jaw clenched, but he said nothing, his gaze fixed on Jasmine. She was a puzzle he couldn't solve, a janitor who spoke like a diplomat. Her calm was unnerving, her eyes catching every flicker of tension in the room. When Mr. Chen posed a question about data privacy, Jasmine translated with a subtle nod to Sterling's legacy. "Our founder believed trust is the cornerstone of progress." David's breath hitched. Another of Arthur's phrases, plucked from a past he'd tried to erase. His paranoia flared. She knew too much. Leo in the server room opened a secure terminal, his heart racing. Rebecca's phone call had lit a fire in him. He couldn't let her sabotage Jasmine, not when her fluency had saved the meeting. His fingers flew, bypassing basic security protocols to access Rebecca's email logs. A single encrypted message caught his eye, sent to an unknown recipient. "Find dirt on Parker. Urgent." Leo's blood ran cold. Rebecca wasn't just suspicious. She was hunting. He hesitated, knowing a deeper dive could cost him his job. But the memory of Arthur Sterling's values, faded but not forgotten, pushed him forward. He saved a copy of the message, his mind already mapping the risks. As the meeting adjourned for another break, David stood, his hands shaking. He approached Jasmine, his voice low. "How do you know my father's words?" he demanded, his eyes searching hers for deceit. Jasmine paused, her rag still in hand, her gaze steady. "I clean, Mr. Sterling," she said softly, "but I listen." Her words were a riddle, a challenge, and they sent a chill down his spine. Rebecca watched from across the room, her lips curling into a faint, dangerous smile. Jasmine returned to her cart, her movements calm, but her mind was a chessboard, every piece in place. She'd heard Rebecca's whisper, felt David's suspicion. For 3 years, she'd been invisible, collecting the secrets of this glass cage. Now the game was hers to play, and someone was already moving against her. The silence on the 80th floor of Sterling Tower was a living thing, coiling around David Sterling's throat as he stood in the hallway, his confrontation with Jasmine Parker still burning in his ears. Her cryptic words, "I clean, Mr. Sterling, but I listen," hung like a specter, taunting him with their ambiguity. His navy suit felt like a straitjacket, his tie a noose he couldn't loosen. The janitor's flawless Mandarin and her eerie knowledge of his father's mantra had cracked open a vault of paranoia. Was she a savior or a saboteur? The portrait of Arthur Sterling loomed in his mind, its painted eyes accusing him of losing control of the empire he'd inherited at 30. Back in the conference room, the Chinese delegation resettled, their black suits stark against the glass walls. Mr. Chen's obsidian gaze swept the room, landing on Jasmine with a flicker of respect. She stood by the table, her navy uniform unassuming, her low bun a quiet defiance of her role. Rebecca Vance, the COO, hovered near David, her red dress a warning flare, her smile a thin veneer over a predator's snarl. Her whispered warning from the break, "If she's a spy, this deal is dead," gnawed at David's resolve. He clutched his phone, the HR email with Jasmine's sterile file offering no answers, only more questions. Nobody was that invisible, not unless they chose to be. Mr. Chen's voice broke the silence, his Mandarin sharp and deliberate. How does Sterling Innovations ensure its AI doesn't become a weapon? The question was a trap, probing not just strategy but morality. David's mind raced, his prepared response, a vague promise of oversight, feeling hollow. He glanced at Jasmine, his desperation a silent plea. She translated, her voice steady, but then she paused, locking eyes with him. "Per an old company memo," she added, "technology has no conscience. We must be its conscience." The words, Arthur Sterling's own, hit David like a physical blow. That memo, buried in a locked archive after his father's death, was a relic he'd tried to erase. How did she know? David's pulse thundered, his paranoia flaring. He saw his father's shadow in Jasmine's calm, her words a ghost haunting the room. Rebecca's eyes narrowed, catching the shift in his expression. She leaned closer, her whisper a serpent's hiss. "She's playing you, David. Nobody finds buried memos by cleaning floors." Her words were acid, burning through his doubt. Jasmine's fluency was no accident. She was a chess player, and he was a pawn. But the deal hung by a thread, and he needed her. "Answer him," he snapped, his voice low, barely masking his fear. Jasmine nodded, her translation weaving Mr. Chen's question into a response that emphasized ethical safeguards, her tone resonating with cultural nuance. The delegation nodded, impressed, but David's mind was elsewhere, trapped in a spiral of suspicion. How did a janitor know his father's words? Was she planted by the rival firm circling for a takeover? The glass walls seemed to close in, the room a cage of his own making. Mr. Chen posed another question about data privacy, and Jasmine's response was flawless, her calm a stark contrast to David's unraveling. In the server room 2 floors below, Leo Martinez's fingers trembled over his keyboard, the glow of his screen casting shadows across his face. The encrypted email he'd found in Rebecca's logs, "Find dirt on Parker. Urgent," had ignited a fire in him. He'd always admired Arthur Sterling's vision, a beacon in the company's now toxic culture. Rebecca's ruthlessness was a betrayal of that legacy, and her hunt for Jasmine felt personal. Leo dug deeper, bypassing another layer of security, his heart pounding as he uncovered a second email, this one to an unknown recipient. "Prepare the algorithm package. They'll pay by Friday." His breath caught. Rebecca wasn't just targeting Jasmine. She was selling Sterling's AI to their rivals. Leo's mind raced. Exposing Rebecca could end his career, branded as a hacker who breached company systems. But letting her destroy Jasmine, who'd saved the meeting with her uncanny skill, felt like a greater betrayal. He saved the emails, his fingers hovering over the send key. A single click could change everything, or ruin him. He thought of Arthur's values, faded but not forgotten, and made his choice. He typed an anonymous message to David. The enemy is in the room. Here's the key. The evidence would wait, a ticking bomb for the right moment. Back in the conference room, David pulled Jasmine aside during a brief pause, his voice a low growl. Where did you get that memo? He demanded, his eyes searching hers for deceit. Jasmine's gaze was steady, unyielding. I clean, Mr. Sterling, she said softly, but dust holds history. Her words were a riddle, a challenge that sent a chill down his spine. She returned to her place, her movements calm, but her mind was a chessboard, every piece calculated. She'd heard Rebecca's whispers, felt David's suspicion. For 3 years she'd been invisible, collecting the secrets of this glass cage. Now the board was set. Rebecca watched from the sidelines, her lips curling into a dangerous smile. She'd already contacted a private investigator, her plan to frame Jasmine for a fabricated crime taking shape. The deal was her stage, and she'd ensure Jasmine was no more than a footnote. As Mr. Chen resumed the meeting, his eyes lingered on Jasmine, a silent acknowledgement of her skill. David felt the room tilt, the balance of power slipping from his grasp. Jasmine was no janitor. She was a ghost in the machine, and someone was already plotting her destruction. The air on the 80th floor of Sterling Tower was a taut wire, vibrating with the weight of secrets unspoken. David Sterling's confrontation with Jasmine Parker, I clean, but dust holds history, had left him reeling, his paranoia a wildfire fed by her cryptic knowledge of his father's words. His navy suit clung to his sweat-damp skin, the glass-walled conference room a mirror reflecting his unraveling. Jasmine, in her navy uniform, stood by the table, her low bun a quiet defiance of her janitor's role. Her calm was a mask, but David saw cracks. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, held a purpose he couldn't grasp. Rebecca Vance's warning echoed in his mind. She's playing you. The billion-dollar AI deal hung by a thread, and David was losing his grip. Rebecca, in her blood-red dress, stood like a predator poised to strike. Her smile was a blade, honed by ambition, and Jasmine's flawless translations had become a threat she couldn't ignore. During the break, she'd finalized her plan. A forged document, a fabricated theft conviction from Jasmine's past, ready to be leaked to Mr. Chen. It would humiliate Jasmine, discredit her, and restore Rebecca's control. She clutched the folder, her fingers steady, her mind alight with the thrill of destruction. Jasmine was a pawn who dared to play queen, and Rebecca would crush her before she could move. 2 floors below, in the dim glow of the server room, Leo Martinez's heart pounded against his ribcage. His laptop screen burned with damning evidence. Rebecca's encrypted emails, one ordering a smear campaign against Jasmine, another promising Sterling's proprietary AI algorithms to their rival for a Friday payout. The words seared into him. Prepare the algorithm package. They'll pay by Friday. Rebecca wasn't just targeting Jasmine. She was orchestrating the company's downfall, paving her path to the CEO's chair. Leo's fingers trembled over his keyboard, his casual polo shirt damp with sweat. Exposing her could end his career, branded as a hacker who breached company systems. But letting her destroy Jasmine, whose Mandarin had saved the meeting, felt like a betrayal of the values Arthur Sterling had championed. Leo's mind flashed to a memory, a faded company handbook, Arthur's words printed in bold. Integrity is our foundation. He joined Sterling Innovations believing in that vision, only to watch Rebecca poison it. His fingers moved, almost on instinct, saving the emails to a secure drive. He typed an anonymous message to David. The enemy is in the room. Here's the key. The evidence was a ticking bomb, but timing was everything. One wrong move, and he'd be the one burned. He hesitated, his cursor hovering over the send key, his moral compass locked in a war with his fear. In the conference room, the delegation returned, Mr. Chen's obsidian eyes scanning the room with a predator's calm. Jasmine resumed her translations, her voice a steady current navigating his questions about AI deployment timelines. Her responses were flawless, weaving cultural nuances that drew nods from the executives. But David's attention fractured, his gaze darting between Jasmine and Rebecca. Jasmine's earlier words, "Dust holds history," gnawed at him, a riddle he couldn't solve. Was she a spy, planted to sabotage the deal? Or was she something else, a ghost from his father's past? His phone buzzed with an HR update. Jasmine's file remained a blank slate. No education, no history beyond 3 years at Sterling. It was too clean, a void that screamed intent. Rebecca seized her moment. As Mr. Chen paused, she slid the forged folder across the table, her voice honeyed with false concern. "Mr. Chen, I must apologize for any confusion. Our translator's background may not be fully vetted." Her eyes flicked to Jasmine, a predator circling. David's stomach churned, his paranoia clashing with his need for the deal. "Not now, Rebecca," he hissed, but her smile didn't waver. She was a serpent, and Jasmine was her prey. Jasmine's expression didn't change, but her eyes caught Rebecca's move, cataloging it like a chess player reading the board. Mr. Chen asked about intellectual property safeguards, his tone sharp. Testing. Jasmine translated, her voice steady, but she added a subtle nod to Sterling's legacy. "Our founder believed innovation must be guarded by trust." David's breath hitched, another of Arthur's phrases, plucked from a past he'd tried to bury. His paranoia surged, a voice screaming that Jasmine knew too much. He glanced at Rebecca, her smile now a smirk, the folder a weapon waiting to be drawn. The room felt like a trap, its glass walls reflecting his fear back at him. Leo, in the server room, made his choice. He hit send, the anonymous email racing to David's inbox. His heart pounded, knowing the risk. He was no longer just a bystander. Upstairs, David's tablet buzzed, but he ignored it. His focus split between Jasmine's calm and Rebecca's threat. The meeting pressed on, Jasmine's translations guiding it toward stability, but the air crackled with unspoken danger. Rebecca's folder lay untouched, a silent promise of destruction. Jasmine felt the weight of their gazes, David's suspicion, Rebecca's malice, but her mind was a fortress built over 3 years of watching, listening, waiting. She'd swept their secrets from these floors, and now she held the board. As the meeting neared its close, David's tablet buzzed again, insistent. He glanced at the screen, the subject line chilling him. "The enemy is in the room." Rebecca's smile faltered, as if sensing a shift. Jasmine translated Mr. Chen's final question, her voice a beacon in the storm. But beneath her calm, a fire burned. A plan, a purpose, a reckoning. The game was hers, and someone was about to lose everything. The 80th floor of Sterling Tower crackled with tension, a live wire ready to spark. The final meeting with the Chinese delegation was a battlefield, and David Sterling stood at its center, his navy suit damp with sweat, his paranoia a vice around his heart. Jasmine Parker's cryptic words, "Dust holds history," and her uncanny knowledge of his father's buried memos had set his mind ablaze. Rebecca Vance's forged folder, a venomous weapon, lay on the glass table, its contents poised to destroy Jasmine. David's tablet buzzed insistently, the anonymous email from Leo Martinez. "The enemy is in the room." Here's the key, burning in his inbox unread. The billion-dollar AI deal hung by a thread, and the room felt like a guillotine. Rebecca, in her blood-red dress, radiated predatory confidence. Her smile was a blade, honed by the certainty that Jasmine, the janitor who dared to outshine her, would fall. The folder, filled with fabricated evidence of Jasmine's theft conviction, was her trump card. She leaned forward, her voice syrupy with false concern. "Mr. Chen, before we finalize, I must clarify our translator's qualifications." Her eyes flicked to Jasmine, a serpent sizing up its prey. Jasmine, in her navy uniform, her low bun a quiet defiance, stood motionless, her gaze steady. She'd seen the folder, felt the weight of Rebecca's malice, but her face betrayed nothing. A chess player awaiting her opponent's fatal move. "Mr. Chen," his obsidian eyes unreadable, nodded for Rebecca to proceed. David's stomach churned, his paranoia clashing with his need for the deal. "Not now," he hissed, but Rebecca ignored him, her fingers brushing the folder. The delegation watched, their silence a pressure that squeezed the room. Jasmine translated Mr. Chen's latest question about AI scalability, her voice a beacon of calm, weaving cultural nuances that drew approving nods. But David's mind was fractured, torn between Rebecca's warning, "She's a spy," and Jasmine's impossible skill. His tablet buzzed again, the email's subject line a scream in his peripheral vision. He ignored it, his focus locked on the folder, a bomb ticking down. In the server room, Leo Martinez paced, his heart a war drum. Sending the anonymous email had been a gamble, exposing Rebecca's betrayal, her sale of Sterling's AI algorithms to their rival. His casual polo shirt clung to his skin, damp with the weight of his decision. If David didn't open the email, Leo's career was over, branded a hacker. But if he did, Rebecca's empire would crumble. Leo's fingers hovered over his laptop, tracking the email's status. Delivered. Unread. He cursed under his breath, the memory of Arthur Sterling's values. Integrity is our foundation, pushing him to stay the course. He lit the fuse. Now he could only wait. Rebecca's hand moved toward the folder, her smile sharpening. "Mr. Chen, our translator's background may surprise you," she began, her tone dripping with condescension. David's pulse spiked, his paranoia screaming that Jasmine was a plant. Yet her translations had saved the deal. He opened his mouth to stop Rebecca, but his tablet buzzed again, relentless. He glanced at it. The subject line, "The enemy is in the room," searing into him. His fingers swiped, opening the email. Screenshots of Rebecca's encrypted messages flashed on the screen. "Prepare the algorithm package. They'll pay by Friday." His blood ran cold. Rebecca wasn't just sabotaging Jasmine. She was selling Sterling's soul. Before Rebecca could open the folder, Jasmine spoke, her Mandarin crisp, directed at Mr. Chen. "Your empire's secrets are for sale, Mr. Sterling, and I'm not the one selling them," she translated, her eyes locking onto David. Mr. Chen, switching to English, his voice calm but lethal, added, "Curiously, your competitor sent us a proposal mirroring our private discussions." The room froze. Rebecca's hand stopped, her smile collapsing into a mask of panic. David stood, his voice a low growl. "Rebecca, explain this." He projected the email onto the conference screen, the damning screenshots illuminating the glass walls. Rebecca's betrayal, time-stamped, undeniable. Rebecca stammered, her voice rising an octave. "This is a setup. She's framing me." Her finger jabbed at Jasmine, but the accusation crumbled under Mr. Chen's gaze. Jasmine translated his response, her voice steady. "Trust is the cornerstone of partnership. Deceit destroys it." The delegation's faces hardened, their approval shifting to disgust. David's mind reeled. Rebecca, his trusted COO, had been the enemy all along. "Security," he barked, his voice cold. Guards entered, their presence a silent verdict. Rebecca's eyes darted, searching for an escape, but the glass cage offered none. She was escorted out, her red dress a fading ember, her empire of ambition reduced to ash. Jasmine guided the meeting to its close, her translations flawless, sealing the billion-dollar deal. Mr. Chen shook her hand, his nod a silent acknowledgement of her worth. David watched, his paranoia replaced by a new fear. Jasmine knew too much, not just about the deal, but about his father's legacy. Her words, "Dust holds history," echoed, a riddle unresolved. As the delegation left, David's tablet lay silent, the email's truth a bomb that had detonated. Jasmine returned to her cart, her movements calm, but her eyes held a fire, a purpose forged in years of invisibility. In the server room, Leo exhaled, his screen showing the email marked red. He'd won, but at what cost? Upstairs, David stared at Jasmine, the janitor who'd rewritten his fate. She was no spy, but she was no ordinary woman either. The portrait of Arthur Sterling watched, its eyes no longer accusing, but expectant. The deal was saved, but a deeper truth waited. Buried in the dust Jasmine had swept for years. The glass cage of Sterling Tower's 80th floor exhaled its tension as the Chinese delegation left, the billion-dollar AI deal secured, but David Sterling's heart still thundered. Rebecca Vance's betrayal, her sale of company secrets to their rival, had been exposed, her red dress a fading ember as security escorted her out. Jasmine Parker, the janitor whose flawless Mandarin had saved the day, stood by her cleaning cart, her navy uniform unassuming, her low bun a quiet defiance. Her words, "Dust holds history," and her uncanny knowledge of Arthur Sterling's buried memos haunted David, a riddle that gnawed at his core. She was no spy, but she was no ordinary janitor either. The portrait of his father loomed in his mind, its eyes no longer accusing, but demanding answers. David's navy suit was a crumpled shell, his tie discarded, his paranoia replaced by a new fear. Jasmine knew too much. The conference room felt hollow, its glass walls reflecting a truth he couldn't grasp. He gestured to Jasmine, his voice low, urgent. "We need to talk. Now." She nodded, her gaze steady, unyielding, as if she'd been waiting for this moment. They left the room, the echo of her translation still lingering, and walked down a shadowed hallway to a door David hadn't opened in years. His father's office, a shrine to Arthur Sterling's legacy, untouched since his death. The office was a time capsule, its air thick with dust and memory. A mahogany desk stood under a portrait of Arthur, his stern gaze a mirror of the one in the conference room. Shelves held faded binders, company memos, and a single-frame photo. Arthur with a man David barely remembered, both smiling, blueprints in hand. David's chest tightened, his father's voice a ghost in his mind. "Integrity is our foundation." He turned to Jasmine, his voice a controlled growl. "Who are you, really? Those memos, my father's words. How do you know them?" His hands clenched, his paranoia flaring one last time, a man teetering on the edge of his empire. Jasmine stood before the portrait, her eyes tracing Arthur's face, then the man beside him. "I'm Jasmine Parker," she said, her voice soft but weighted with steel. "Daughter of Joseph Parker, your father's co-founder." The words hit David like a thunderclap, his breath catching. Joseph Parker, his father's partner, a name erased from Sterling's history, a man David had pushed out with legal maneuvers after Arthur's death to secure control. Jasmine's gaze locked onto his, unflinching. "I didn't come here to destroy you, David. I came to restore what you and Rebecca tried to bury." David's mind reeled, memories flooding back. Joseph's quiet brilliance, his departure cloaked in lawsuits, the shares David had seized. He'd been 25, ruthless, desperate to prove himself. Now at 30, he saw the cost. You've been here 3 years, he stammered, his voice raw. "Why? Revenge?" Jasmine shook her head, her calm a stark contrast to his turmoil. "Revenge burns foundations. I wanted to rebuild them." She stepped closer, her voice steady. "I learned Mandarin, studied your deals, watched your mistakes. I cleaned your floors, but I was always listening." Her words were a blade, slicing through David's defenses. He saw her now, not a janitor, but a strategist, a ghost who'd haunted his empire from within. "Those memos," she continued, gesturing to the shelves, "were in the archives you never bothered to lock. Your father's words, Joseph's designs, they're the soul of this company. You forgot that." David's gaze fell to the photo, Joseph's smile a mirror of Jasmine's quiet resolve. Guilt churned in his gut, a weight heavier than any takeover threat. He'd built a skyscraper, but its foundation was cracked, and Jasmine had seen it all. "Why now?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Jasmine's eyes softened, but her tone held fire. "Because today you needed me, and because Rebecca's betrayal gave me the opening to show you what you've lost." Her words were a payoff, the culmination of every cryptic hint. Dust holds history. A skyscraper crumbles without its foundation. David's paranoia dissolved, replaced by a humbling truth. Jasmine wasn't his enemy. She was his mirror, reflecting his failures and his father's dreams. He sank into the desk chair, his hands trembling. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice cracking. Jasmine's gaze was steady, a beacon in the dust. "A seat at the table. Not for me, but for the legacy you erased. Make me Director of Innovation and Ethics. Let me rebuild what you and Rebecca broke." The audacity of her demand stunned him, but her calm conviction was undeniable. She'd saved his deal, exposed his traitor, and now she held his father's truth. David nodded, a weight lifted, a decision made. "You're in," he said, his voice firm but shaken. As Jasmine left the office, her steps echoed in the silent hallway, a promise of change. David stared at the photo, Arthur and Joseph side by side, their dream reborn in a woman he'd overlooked. But the dust still held secrets, and Jasmine's fire hinted at more to come. Outside, the Manhattan skyline glittered, a city of ambition and betrayal, waiting for the next move in a game David was only beginning to understand. The dust of Arthur Sterling's office still lingered in David Sterling's mind. The revelation of Jasmine Parker's identity. Daughter of Joseph Parker, his father's erased co-founder, burning like a brand. Her demand for a seat as Director of Innovation and Ethics had been a gauntlet thrown, and David's acceptance, born of guilt and necessity, had shifted the ground beneath Sterling Tower. 1 year later, the 80th floor was no longer a glass cage, but a beacon of renewal, its walls reflecting a Manhattan skyline that glittered with possibility. David, at 31, stood taller in his navy suit, the weight of his father's portrait now a guide, not a judgment. But the scars of betrayal and redemption ran deep, and today's announcement would test their strength. Jasmine, no longer in her Navy uniform, stood at the head of the conference room, her tailored gray blazer a symbol of her ascent. Her low bun remained, a nod to the janitor who'd swept secrets from these floors. As Director of Innovation and Ethics, she transformed Sterling Innovations, forging partnerships across Asia that doubled the company's reach. Her strategies, rooted in the principles of Arthur and Joseph, had rebuilt the foundation that David had nearly crumbled. Yet her calm exterior hid a fire, a vigilance born of 3 years watching from the shadows, collecting truths others discarded. Today, she would unveil her final move, a legacy to outshine the betrayals of the past. The room buzzed with executives, their eyes on Jasmine, not David. The portrait of Arthur Sterling hung behind her, joined now by one of Joseph Parker, their smiles a testament to a dream reborn. David's chest tightened, the memory of his ruthless purge of Joseph at 25, a wound that still bled. Jasmine's revelation in the founder's office had forced him to face that guilt, to see the empire he'd built on a cracked foundation. He glanced at his tablet, the anonymous email from Leo Martinez, "The enemy is in the room," a ghost that had saved him from Rebecca Vance's treachery. Leo, now a lead engineer, sat in the front row, his casual polo shirt a quiet rebellion against the suits, his nod to Jasmine a silent alliance. Rebecca's absence was a specter, her betrayal a year ago, selling Sterling's AI to rivals, still echoing. Civil lawsuits and a 5-year industry ban had stripped her of power, her name a cautionary tale in business journals. David had seen her once, months ago, in a Queen's cafe, her red dress replaced by a faded jacket, her eyes hollow. The memory stirred no pity, only a resolve to never repeat her mistakes. Jasmine's voice broke his thoughts, clear and commanding. "Today we honor the past to build the future," she began, her words a bridge between memory and ambition. The executives leaned forward, drawn to her quiet authority. She announced the Parker Sterling Scholarship, a fund for minority STEM students, named for the founders whose vision she'd restored. "No one should be invisible," she said, her gaze sweeping the room. "Talent lies in the shadows, waiting for its moment." David's throat tightened, her words a mirror to his blindness, his failure to see her for 3 years. The scholarship was her masterstroke, funded partly by her own salary, a testament to her belief in second chances. The executives applauded, but David saw the fire in her eyes, a strategist who'd turned invisibility into power. In a small Queens apartment, Rebecca watched the announcement on a live stream, her coffee cold, her hands trembling. The lawsuits had drained her, the ban had broken her, and Jasmine's face on the screen was a blade to her pride. She remembered her venomous whispers, her forged folder, her certainty that Jasmine was a nobody. Now Jasmine was a titan, and Rebecca was the footnote. A flicker of regret stirred, not for her actions, but for underestimating the woman who'd swept her secrets. She turned off the screen, the silence of her apartment a cage of her own making. Back in the conference room, Leo stood, his voice steady as he praised Jasmine's leadership. "She's shown us what integrity looks like," he said, his eyes on David, a subtle challenge. David nodded, his guilt tempered by resolve. He took the podium, his voice firm. "Sterling Innovations was built on a foundation of trust," he said, echoing Arthur's words that Jasmine had wielded like weapons. "With Jasmine Parker, we've rebuilt it." The applause was thunderous, but Jasmine remained still, her gaze on the portraits of Arthur and Joseph, a silent vow fulfilled. As the room emptied, David approached her, his voice low. "You could have destroyed me," he said, the weight of their confrontation in the founder's office still raw. "Why didn't you?" Jasmine's smile was soft, but her eyes held fire. "Destruction is easy, David. Building something greater, that's power." Her words were a payoff, the culmination of every cryptic hint. Dust holds history. A skyscraper crumbles without its foundation. She'd turned 3 years of invisibility into a legacy that outshone Rebecca's betrayal, David's blindness, and the company's fractured past. Outside, the Manhattan skyline glowed, a city of ambition and redemption. Jasmine stood by the glass, no longer a janitor, but an architect of change. The scholarship, the partnerships, the portraits, they were her checkmate, a testament to a woman who'd watched, listened, and waited. David watched her, the weight of his father's legacy no longer a burden, but a promise. Sterling Innovations was no longer a hollow skyscraper. It stood on a foundation forged by a woman who turned shadows into light. Jasmine Parker's journey from the shadows to the spotlight proves that true power lies in resilience, not titles. Her story challenges us. What unseen potential have we overlooked? What legacies can we rebuild? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share how this tale of betrayal, redemption, and triumph resonated with you in the comments below. Thank you for joining us in this gripping saga of ambition and truth. Your support fuels our storytelling, and we can't wait to bring you more tales that pulse with suspense and heart. Stay tuned for the next chapter of inspiration, where the underdog rises and secrets unravel. Until then, keep watching, keep listening, keep dreaming.